On the night of April 13th, 1945, a Canadian private with one eye, a broken back, and a sack of grenades walked into a German-occupied city alone. By morning, the entire German garrison had fled. 600 soldiers, gone. Not through artillery, not through tanks, not through a full battalion assault, through the actions of one man. His name was Léo Major, and when his commanding officers heard his plan to liberate the city of Zwolle with just his friend and a handful of grenades, they called him insane. They called it impossible. What happened that night became one of the most incredible acts of bravery in World War II, a story so unbelievable that Major's own son didn't learn what his father had done until an official from the Netherlands showed up at their door 30 years after the war ended. This is the story of a man who refused to quit even when the war had already quit on him.
Léo Major was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts on January 23, 1921. His father was harsh, demanding, the kind of man who made his own son feel worthless. When Léo was 14 years old, he left home. He couldn't take it anymore. He moved in with his aunt in Montreal and decided he would spend his life proving his father wrong. For years he worked construction, different jobs, different sites, always moving. A plumber's apprentice, a labourer. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would make him famous or respected. Then in 1940, at 19 years old, Léo Major did something that surprised everyone who knew him. He enlisted in the Canadian Army. It wasn't for the glory. It wasn't for recognition. At that point, nobody knew his name. Nobody was expecting anything from him. He enlisted because he was determined, because he had something to prove, not to the world, to himself. He trained hard, harder than the men around him. While other soldiers complained about conditions, about the cold, about being pushed, Major just kept moving. He absorbed everything. He learned to shoot. He learned tactics. He learned to think like a soldier. By 1944, he was part of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, the Régiment de la Chaudière. Not an officer, not a hero yet, just Private Léo Major, a scout and sniper in a regiment full of scouts and snipers. On June 6, 1944, he landed in Normandy on Juno Beach. While thousands of soldiers were getting killed in their first moments on the beach, Major was doing something remarkable. During the chaos of the landing, while men were dying all around him, he spotted a German Hanomag, a half-tracked armoured personnel carrier. Most soldiers would have ignored it, or called for backup, or tried to flank it. Major attacked it alone. He captured it, single-handedly. The vehicle contained communication equipment and German army codes. Intelligence officers debriefed him for hours. In his first hours of combat, Léo Major had already done more than most soldiers would do in the entire war. But it was what happened 3 days later that nearly ended his story before it really began. 3 days after D-Day, Major came across an SS patrol in Normandy. 4 German soldiers. He engaged them. The firefight was quick and brutal. Major killed 4 men, but one of them got a grenade off before he died. It was a phosphorus grenade. The explosion lit up in Major's face. The phosphorus burned through his left eye. The pain was immediate and absolute. His vision in that eye went dark. He was evacuated to a field hospital. The doctors examined his wounds and told him the truth. His combat service was over. He had lost the sight in his left eye. He would be sent back to England. He would be invalided out. His war was finished. Major refused. He sat in that hospital bed with his left eye wrapped in bandages, and he refused to accept that his war was over. The doctors thought he was foolish. They thought he was in shock. They tried to convince him that it was over, that he had done enough, that going home was the honorable thing to do. But Léo Major had spent his entire life proving his father wrong. He had spent years clawing his way out of poverty and insignificance. He had just landed on the beaches of Normandy. He had just started his war. He was not going to go home.
Major convinced his commanding officer of something that seemed impossible, that a sniper only needed one good eye, that his eye patch would not affect his ability to shoot, that he could still be valuable to his regiment. By the force of his will and his stubbornness, he talked his way back into the fight. By September, Major had recovered enough to rejoin his unit. The Canadian Army was fighting in the Netherlands, pushing the Germans back toward their homeland. The Battle of the Scheldt was a brutal, grinding fight through swamps and flooded terrain against determined German resistance. During this battle, Major's unit was searching for a patrol of fresh recruits who had failed to return to base. The younger soldiers had been sent out on a routine patrol and simply disappeared. Major volunteered to search for them. What happened next became the first of his incredible feats. While searching for the lost patrol, Major encountered German soldiers, not a few, dozens of them. He was one man against overwhelming odds in terrain that favored the Germans. Any reasonable soldier would have pulled back and called for support. Léo Major did not call for support. In the course of a single operation, he captured 93 German soldiers, alone, without backup, without support. He used grenades, his rifle, and his wits to overwhelm unit after unit of German soldiers. 93 men. When word of this feat reached higher command, they wanted to recognize him. They wanted to award him the Distinguished Conduct Medal, second only to the Victoria Cross for gallantry in action. It was one of the highest honors a soldier could receive. Major refused the medal. When asked why, Major gave an answer that told you everything you needed to know about who he was. He said Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery was incompetent, and he had no respect for any award given by such a man. So Major refused one of the highest military honors of the war because he didn't respect the man who would give it to him. He meant it. He wasn't being coy or humble. He meant it. But then, in February 1945, the war tried to kill Léo Major one more time. He was helping a military chaplain load the bodies of dead soldiers from a destroyed Tiger II tank into a truck. When they finished, the chaplain and the truck driver got in the front. Major jumped in the back. The truck hit a landmine. The explosion was devastating. The chaplain was killed instantly. The driver was killed instantly. The truck was torn apart. Major was thrown into the air by the force of the blast and smashed down hard on his back. He lost consciousness. When he woke in a field hospital 30 miles away, doctors were looking at him with expressions of deep concern. A doctor approached him and delivered the diagnosis. Major had broken his back in 3 places. He had broken 4 ribs. He had broken both ankles. He was, medically speaking, finished. The doctors told him there was no possibility he would ever be combat effective again. No possibility he would walk normally again. No possibility he would return to his regiment. His war was definitely over. Major looked at them and refused again. The conversation must have been something like this. The doctors would have said, "You cannot possibly return to combat," and Major would have said, "Yes, I can." And the doctors would have said, "You have broken your back in 3 places," and Major would have said, "I don't care."
For a week, Major lay in the hospital bed, broken and in pain. Morphine kept the worst of it at bay, but he was trapped, immobilized, watching other soldiers walk past his window. After a week, he escaped. In the middle of the night, Major got out of his hospital bed. We don't know exactly how he did it. The records are vague, but somehow, with a broken back, broken ribs and broken ankles, he escaped from the hospital. He made his way to Nijmegen, a Dutch town where he had met a family months earlier. He stayed with them, lying low, recovering in secret, while technically being absent without authority from the army. For nearly a month, he recovered in hiding. The family nursed him back to health. His body began to mend, the pain began to subside, and his determination returned. By March 1945, he had recovered enough to move. He found a ride back to his regiment. By early April, the Régiment de la Chaudière were advancing through the Netherlands toward Germany. The Allies were winning. The Germans were being pushed back, but they were still fighting, still dying, still defending their positions. Zwolle was a Dutch city of about 50,000 people. It sat in occupied territory, held by a German garrison. The Allies were planning to assault the city at dawn the next morning. Artillery would pound it. Infantry would attack it. It would be a brutal, destructive operation. But it would work, unless there was another way. On the evening of April 13th, the commanding officer of the Régiment de la Chaudière made a request. He needed 2 men to go into the city and gather intelligence. He needed to know where the German positions were, how many troops were stationed there, and whether contact could be made with the Dutch resistance. This was meant to be a reconnaissance mission. Find information, come back, report. 2 volunteers stepped forward. Léo Major and his best friend, Wilfred Welly Arsenault. Major and Arsenault had been through everything together. They had survived Normandy, the Scheldt, all the grinding battles of the past 9 months. They trusted each other the way only soldiers who have faced death together can trust each other. They were given their orders: scout the city, contact the resistance, come back with intelligence. That night they moved towards Zwolle. It was after midnight when they reached the outskirts of the city. They moved carefully, staying in shadows, avoiding roads. They had almost made it to the first buildings when German sentries spotted them. Gunfire erupted. Wilfred Arsenault was hit by machine gun fire. He went down hard. Major killed the Germans who had shot him, but it was too late. Arsenault was dead. One moment, Major had a best friend. The next moment, he had a dead friend lying in the mud next to him. The rage that came over him was absolute. Major made a decision in that moment that would either be the bravest or the craziest decision of his life.
He was going to liberate Zwolle alone. Now, understand what he was suggesting. The city had a German garrison estimated at around 600 soldiers, modern weapons, prepared positions, defensive advantages. Major had a Sten gun, a British submachine gun with limited range and magazine capacity. Some sources say he picked up Arsenault's guns as well, giving him 2 submachine guns. A sack of hand grenades, 1 good eye, a broken back that was only partially healed, and the corpse of his best friend in the nearby darkness. By all rights, this was suicide, but Major entered the city anyway. He moved carefully through the streets, keeping to shadows. Most of the city was dark, most of the citizens were asleep. The Germans occupied certain key positions, barracks, headquarters, strongpoints. But for a man moving alone in darkness, there was freedom in the shadows. Major made his way toward the city center, and then he spotted something that changed his approach. He saw a German staff car parked outside a building. The driver was outside the vehicle. Major attacked. He overwhelmed the driver and captured him. Then, using the German soldier as a shield and guide, Major moved deeper into the city. There was a bar nearby.
German officers were inside, taking a drink. Major walked in with his captive German soldier. Inside the bar, Major found an officer, a high-ranking German who could speak French. The officer was from Alsace-Lorraine, a border region between France and Germany, historically contested, historically not fully committed to Nazi ideology. What happened next requires understanding Léo Major's mind. He was enraged. His best friend had just been killed. He wanted to kill Germans. He wanted to destroy this city. He wanted revenge. But he was also a soldier who understood strategy. He understood that if he fired a gun in this city, artillery would come. Civilians would die. The Dutch people he was supposed to be liberating would be destroyed by the very weapons meant to protect them. So Major did something that should not have worked. He explained the situation to the German officer. He told him that at 6 a.m. Canadian artillery would begin firing at the city. He explained that unless the German garrison withdrew, thousands of Dutch civilians would be killed in the bombardment. He even gave the officer his gun back as a sign of good faith. The officer listened. He had been fighting in this war for years. He knew the Nazis were losing. He knew young men were dying for nothing. And he knew that if he didn't withdraw, his own men would be responsible for the deaths of thousands of Dutch civilians. The officer agreed to talk to his commanding general. But then Major did something that was pure genius. He left the bar and he started a one-man war inside Zwolle. Major ran through the streets of Zwolle firing his submachine gun, not to kill specifically, but to make noise, to create the impression that a large force was assaulting the city. He threw grenades where they would make sound and explosions, but minimize casualties. He was creating the illusion of an invasion. Every German soldier in Zwolle heard gunfire from multiple directions. Every German defender heard the sound of battle approaching from different streets. They heard explosions, they heard gunfire, they heard what they thought was a massive Canadian assault beginning. In reality, it was one man with one gun and a sack of grenades. For 6 hours, Major moved through the streets making noise, creating chaos, creating the impression that the Canadians had somehow infiltrated the city in force. At one point, he encountered German soldiers directly. He killed some, wounded others, captured some. Each encounter reinforced the idea that they were under attack by a much larger force. Then Major made a strategic move that ended the entire operation. He set the Gestapo headquarters on fire. The Gestapo was the secret police. They were responsible for some of the worst atrocities of the war. Setting their headquarters ablaze was both a practical military decision and a symbolic one. The Germans saw the fire. They understood what it meant. The city was being liberated. Resistance was futile. As dawn broke on April 14th, the German garrison began to retreat. The commanding officer, whom Major had convinced in the bar, gave orders for withdrawal. Soldiers poured out of the city, heading east toward Germany. By the time the sun came up, the city was liberated. And Léo Major walked back to the Canadian lines with German prisoners in tow. The exact number of Germans captured and killed that night is disputed. Some sources say Major captured dozens. Some say the numbers were inflated. Some say the entire garrison fled without being directly captured by him. The truth is that what happened that night was complicated. The German commander's decision to withdraw was influenced by Major's actions, but also by the promise of Canadian artillery. The Dutch resistance may have played a role in spreading confusion and chaos. But what is not disputed is this: Zwolle was liberated. The city that was supposed to be destroyed by artillery fire the next morning was spared. Thousands of Dutch civilians were saved from bombardment. And it happened because one man, with a broken back and one eye, walked into a city alone and convinced an entire garrison to surrender. When Major returned to his regiment and reported what had happened, his commanding officers didn't believe him at first. One man had liberated an entire city. One man had captured dozens of German soldiers. One man had convinced a garrison to withdraw. It seemed impossible. But the reports from Zwolle began to arrive. Dutch civilians emerged from their homes. The resistance confirmed what had happened. The Dutch people talked about the Canadian soldier who had liberated them single-handedly. The story was true. Major was recommended for the Distinguished Conduct Medal for his actions in Zwolle. This time the award was for genuine heroism. This time it was specifically for saving the city and its people. This time, Major accepted. He was formally recognized for his bravery. His commander shook his hand. Higher officers acknowledged what he had done. But Léo Major's modesty was as powerful as his courage. When people asked him about Zwolle, when people wanted to hear the story, when Dutch officials came to thank him, Major didn't dwell on what he had done. He deflected. He changed the subject. He didn't want the attention. It was nothing, he would say. I was just doing my job. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. By May 1945, the war in Europe was over. Germany surrendered. The fighting stopped. Léo Major had survived. He had proven his father wrong. He had transformed himself from a rejected boy to one of the most decorated soldiers in the Canadian Army. And then he went home. Major returned to Montreal and got a job as a plumber. He picked up his old life. He got married. He had children. He went to work. He came home. Nobody in Montreal knew who he was. Nobody in his neighborhood knew that this quiet plumber had captured 93 Germans at the Scheldt. Nobody knew that he had liberated an entire Dutch city. Nobody knew that he had done things that seemed impossible. His own son didn't know.
For 30 years, Léo Major said nothing about the war. He went about his life quietly. He worked, he raised his family. He didn't talk about his medals or his decorations. When asked, he would brush off the questions. It was a long time ago, he would say. It doesn't matter anymore. But it mattered to Zwolle. 30 years after the war ended, a Dutch official showed up at the Major family home. The man explained who he was and why he had come. He had travelled all the way from the Netherlands to find Léo Major because the people of Zwolle wanted him to know something. They remembered him. They had named a street after him. They taught the story of his liberation to their children in schools. They had not forgotten. Major's son, Daniel Aime, was 9 years old when that official arrived. He had no idea what his father had done in the war. He listened in amazement as the Dutch official described the liberation of Zwolle. Later, Daniel Aime asked his father why he had never told him any of this. Major's response was characteristic. I didn't think anyone would believe me. He thought the story was so incredible that nobody would believe him, so he said nothing. But the Dutch people believed. They remembered. They never forgot the Canadian soldier who had liberated their city. When Major visited Zwolle in later years, he was treated like a hero. The townspeople welcomed him. They showed him the street named after him. They told him stories of how his actions had saved their city and their lives. For the first time, Léo Major seemed to accept that what he had done mattered. In his final years, Major became a celebrated figure in the Dutch city. He returned many times. He made friends with the townspeople. He attended commemorative events. When he died in Montreal in 2008 at the age of 87, Dutch officials and Dutch citizens made the journey to his funeral to pay their respects. A street sign was carried to his grave, Léo Major Laan, Léo Major Lane. Even in death, the people of Zwolle did not forget.
Léo Major was the only Canadian to ever receive the Distinguished Conduct Medal twice, the first for his actions at the Battle of the Scheldt, where he captured 93 German soldiers, the second for the liberation of Zwolle. But his honours didn't end there.
When the Korean War broke out in 1950, Major volunteered again. He was in his 30s now, older than most soldiers. He could have stayed home. He could have focused on his family and his plumbing business. Instead, he went back to war. During the First Battle of Myeryang-san in Korea, Major led the capture of a key hill that changed the trajectory of the entire battle. For this action, he received a bar to his Distinguished Conduct Medal, a rare honor that indicated exceptional bravery in a second separate war. He became one of only 3 soldiers in the entire British Commonwealth to receive the DCM twice, one of only 3. In the history of the British Empire and all its successor nations, only 3 soldiers have ever demonstrated such consistent, exceptional bravery across multiple wars, and one of them was a plumber from Montreal. But even after Korea, even after a second war, even after receiving the second highest military decoration twice, Major still refused the spotlight. He went home. He worked as a plumber. He lived quietly in Montreal until he died. They called his plan impossible. A single man with one eye and a broken back walking into a city held by 600 enemy soldiers and convincing them to leave. Impossible. But Léo Major had spent his entire life doing impossible things. He had spent his childhood proving his father wrong. He had spent his early army career proving officers wrong. He had refused to quit when doctors said his war was over. He had escaped a hospital with a shattered spine to return to fighting, and on a single night in April 1945, he proved that the most impossible things can sometimes be the truest. Today, Zwolle remembers Léo Major not as a medal recipient or a war hero, but as a liberator, the man who gave them their freedom. At soccer games in the Netherlands, fans hold up banners with his name, Léo Major, the sole savior of Zwolle, they declare. In schools, teachers tell children the story of the one-eyed Canadian soldier who liberated their city single-handedly. A street bears his name, and every year on April 14th, the people of Zwolle gather to remember the night when one man walked into their city and changed everything. Léo Major never sought recognition. He never wanted to be famous. He just wanted to prove that a rejected boy from Massachusetts, raised in Montreal, could become something more. He wanted to matter. In the end, he mattered more than he could have ever imagined, not because of medals or official recognition, but because on an impossible night he liberated an entire city, because thousands of Dutch people lived to see their freedom because of what he did, because a street in Zwolle will forever bear his name, and because a boy from poverty became a legend.